7 nations warned FIFA this would happen. FIFA ignored them. Tonight it happened in a semifinal, and Infantino has gone completely silent. Let that sit for a moment, because what I'm about to tell you is not a story about a football match. It is a story about what happens when the people in power decide that they know better than everyone else, when they take the warnings of 7 of the most important football federations in the world and place them in a drawer and walk away from the drawer and pretend the warnings never happened. And then reality arrives, not in a group stage match where the stakes are manageable, not in a round of 16 where there is time to absorb the chaos and move forward. In a semifinal, in front of the entire planet with everything on the line and no way to contain the damage, Gianni Infantino has not made a public statement in the 11 hours since the final whistle. 11 hours. The president of FIFA, silent. And if you understand anything about how this organization operates, you understand that silence from Infantino is not calm. It is the silence of a man who knows that anything he says right now will make the situation worse. It is the silence of someone who was told exactly what would happen and chose not to listen and is now watching the consequences play out in real time on the biggest stage in world football. Stay until the end of this video, because I am going to take you through everything. The original warnings, the specific rule that caused this, the moment tonight when it happened, what it cost, and the question that every federation, every coach, every player, and every fan watching this tournament now needs answered before a single ball is kicked in the final. I've been covering this story since before the tournament started. We told you about the 7 nations, we told you about the rules, we told you what was coming, and tonight everything we said would happen happened. Subscribe if you are not already here, and let's go. You need to understand the timeline, because the timeline is the story. Before this World Cup began, 7 of the most powerful football federations on the planet stood up in front of FIFA and said the same thing in different languages with different arguments but with identical conclusions. These rules are unworkable. These rules are dangerous for competitive fairness. These rules will cause a moment that damages this tournament in a way that cannot be repaired. Argentina said it, England said it, Spain said it twice, France said it, Portugal said it, Germany said it, Colombia said it, 7 nations, 7 sets of technical staff and legal representatives and sporting directors who had studied the rules and reached the same conclusion independently. FIFA's response was to schedule another meeting, then a press conference in which Infantino used the phrase evolution of the game 4 times in 12 minutes and answered 0 of the specific technical objections that the federations had raised, and then the tournament started and the rules stayed exactly as they were, and FIFA moved on, and the media largely moved on with them because there were matches to cover and storylines to follow, and it is easier to report on what is happening on the pitch than to keep pushing on what is happening in the boardrooms. We did not move on. We covered the first red card shown under the mouth covering rule. We covered the deported referee. We covered the attendance crisis at the American venues. We covered every warning sign, and tonight all of those warning signs converged into a single moment in a World Cup semifinal that changed the result of the match and may have changed the outcome of the entire tournament. Here's what happened, and I want to be precise about this because the details matter, and the details are what the mainstream coverage is already beginning to blur at the edges in the way that mainstream coverage always does when the story is uncomfortable for the organizations that hold the broadcast rights and the press credentials. The match was level, 47 minutes played in the second half. 2 teams who had earned the right to be in a World Cup semifinal through weeks of competition, through physical and psychological sacrifice, through tactical intelligence and individual brilliance and collective suffering. The kind of match that the World Cup exists to produce, the kind of moment that every child who has ever kicked a football against a wall dreams about being part of. And then a player covered his mouth while saying something to an opposing player during a confrontation that had followed a disputed foul. The referee reached into his pocket, and the first ever red card shown under the mouth-covering rule in a World Cup knockout match was produced in a World Cup semifinal. That player's team played the remaining 43 minutes of that match plus extra time with 10 men. They lost. They are not in the final. And the question of whether the result would have been different with 11 men is not a question anyone can answer with certainty. Football does not work that way. You cannot run the match again with the red card removed and see what happens. But what you can say with complete certainty is this: the outcome of a World Cup semifinal was materially altered by a rule that 7 federations formally objected to before the tournament began. a rule that was introduced not because the game needed it, but because FIFA needed to be consistent with a disciplinary decision it had made under media pressure 18 months earlier. A rule that has nothing to do with the quality of football being played and everything to do with the institutional reputation management of an organization that confused protecting its image with protecting the sport. The player who received the red card had not committed a foul. He had not been violent. He had not abused anyone in a way that could be proven or demonstrated or confirmed by any evidence available to the referee in the moment. He had covered his mouth with his hand while speaking. That is the entirety of what he did. And for that, he was removed from a World Cup semifinal. His team played most of that match with 10 men, and they will not be in the final. I want to talk about what the Seven Nations are saying tonight, because this is where the story goes next, and this is what FIFA is most afraid of. In the hours since the final whistle, the reaction from inside the football world has not been diplomatic. The federation of the team that received the red card issued a statement that used the word catastrophic. Not unfortunate, not controversial. Catastrophic. They are already in contact with sports arbitration specialists. They have already formally requested an emergency session with the FIFA disciplinary committee before the final takes place. They know that session will almost certainly not reverse the result. Results in football are not reversed in this way, and FIFA will not set that precedent regardless of the pressure applied. But the formal request creates a legal and institutional record, and that record matters for what comes after this tournament ends. The other 6 nations who warned FIFA before the tournament are not staying quiet either. 3 of them have issued statements in the hours since the match ended. 2 of those statements used language that goes significantly further than anything said before the tournament started. One federation, and I will not name it here because the statement has not been officially confirmed through their formal communications channels, and this channel does not publish unverified information, has reportedly discussed the possibility of formally withdrawing from future FIFA tournaments unless the governance structure of rule changes is fundamentally reformed. Not tweaked, reformed. That is a significant escalation from the position those same federations held when the tournament began. And Infantino has said nothing. 11 hours, nothing. Now, I want to give you the honest analysis that you came to this channel for, because there are 2 ways to tell this story, and one of them is the way the large broadcasters and the large football media organizations will tell it. They will say the referee applied the rules as written. They will say the rules were communicated to all participating teams before the tournament. They will say that the decision to cover the mouth was a choice made by the player, and that choices have consequences. They will present this as a story about the difficulty of refereeing at the highest level and the challenge of implementing new regulations in a high-pressure environment. And every word of that will be technically accurate, and it will miss the point entirely. The point is not whether the referee applied the rules correctly. The referee almost certainly did. The point is whether the rules should exist. The point is whether a regulation that produces this outcome in a World Cup semifinal is a regulation that serves football. And the answer to that question is not complicated. It is not nuanced. It does not require balance or diplomatic language or the presentation of multiple valid perspectives. The answer is no. A rule that sends a player off in a World Cup semifinal for covering his mouth with his hand while speaking during a confrontation is not a rule that serves football. It is a rule that serves the institutional needs of an organization that made a mistake under pressure and built a regulatory framework to protect that mistake rather than admitting it and moving forward. FIFA had the resources to invest in pitch-side audio technology that could actually capture what players say to each other during confrontations. That technology exists. It is used in other sports. It would have provided actual evidence rather than requiring referees to make instant judgments based on a gesture. FIFA chose not to invest in that technology. FIFA chose instead to ban the gesture. And tonight, the consequence of that choice played out in a World Cup semifinal, and a team that had earned the right to compete for the biggest prize in football left the pitch with 10 men and a result that will define their season and possibly their generation's relationship with this tournament. And I want to say one more thing before we get to the questions, and this is something I genuinely believe matters beyond the football. What happened tonight is an example of a pattern that goes far beyond sport. The pattern of institutions that face a difficult decision under pressure take the expedient option rather than the right option, build structures to protect the expedient option, and then watch those structures produce damage in situations where the stakes are highest. It happens in politics, it happens in business, it happens in sport. The specific details change. The underlying dynamic is always the same: short-term image management at the cost of long-term integrity. And the people who pay the price are never the people who made the original decision. Tonight, a player paid the price, his teammates paid the price, an entire nation's football dreams paid the price. And Gianni Infantino is sitting in silence somewhere, choosing his next words very carefully. There are 4 questions that will define what happens next. The first is whether FIFA convenes an emergency review of the mouth-covering rule before the final is played. Not because the result of tonight's match will change, it will not, but because allowing the final to be played under rules that have just produced this outcome in a semifinal would be an institutional statement that FIFA considers the rule valid and correctly applied. That statement would be incorrect, and everyone in world football knows it. The second question is whether the affected federation pursues formal arbitration and what the timeline of that process looks like relative to the final. Sports arbitration is not fast, but the existence of an active formal challenge to the rules before the final adds a dimension to the event that cannot be ignored by broadcasters, sponsors, or neutrals watching from around the world. The third question is what the coaches and captains of the 2 teams in the final say publicly in their pre-match press conferences, because those press conferences are mandatory and they will happen, and the journalists in those rooms will ask about tonight, and the answers given will set the tone for how the final is discussed before a single minute is played. The fourth question is the one that matters most after the tournament ends. What does this moment do to the governance conversation inside FIFA? Because the 7 nations who raised formal objections before this tournament are not going to accept a meeting and a press conference full of phrases about the evolution of the game. They have evidence now, concrete, documented, broadcast to 2 billion people, evidence that their objections were correct. That evidence changes the negotiating position of every federation that cares about how football is governed. And the way FIFA responds to that changed position will tell us everything about whether this institution is capable of genuine reform or whether it will do what it has always done and wait for the noise to die down and change nothing. Subscribe if you are not already subscribed. This channel is going to cover every development between now and the final. The emergency review request, the federation statements, whatever Infantino finally says when he decides the silence has lasted long enough, the pre-final press conferences. All of it, and we are going to cover it the way we always cover it. Without the filter of broadcast rights, without the diplomatic language, without the balance that leaves you more confused than when you started. 7 nations warned FIFA this would happen. FIFA ignored them. Tonight it happened in a semi-final. Infantino has gone silent, and the final is in 4 days. We will see what those 4 days look like. See you in the next one.